AWAIR, a Workplace Accident and Injury Reduction Act. What is AWAIR? A Minnesota law that requires a workplace to develop a plan to implement, measure, and maintain a safe work environment. So what five policies at Divine make up the AWARE Act? Our safety policy, disaster, infection control, hazard communication, also known as Right to Know Act or Minnesota Employee Right to Know Act, and employee health ergonomics, safe work practices. So what is the location of each department's AWARE book? Well, we'll go through each of our departments. In nursing, it's in the cupboard above the sink. In activities, it's in the bookcase in the back. In the kitchen, it's in the metal cabinet against the wall of where the exit door is. In the laundry, it's in the drawer on the clean side closest to the wall. In the office, it's on the desk in the business officer's office. In maintenance, it's on the maintenance desk. In Lake Villa, it's in the closet on the way out to St. Mary's Street. The end. AWARE. Our hazard communication program is part of the AWARE program, also known as the Employee Right to Know or MIRCA, Minnesota Employee Right to Know Act. You have a right to know about the chemicals you are working with. In this talk, we want you to be able to define hazard communication, list 3 ways your employer may communicate information about chemical hazards to you, define an SDS, discuss label container safety, and list 4 types of information you may find on a chemical warning label. If you have any questions after this talk, ask your supervisor. Americans are exposed to millions of chemicals every day. They can threaten their safeties and cause fires, cause accidents, and hurt their health. So what do? Where do we find out what chemical this is? Look on the product label. The United Nations Globally Harmonized System, GHS, has decided to make the formats on chemical bottles and on SDS sheets. We'll talk more about SDS sheets in a minute. Unified. So if you go to Japan and you look at number 4 on the SDS sheet, it will be about first aid. If you look at number 3 on a bottle, you will find the first aid there. So 1 to 7 will be on the bottle, and we'll talk more about each of those. The first is the product identifier, which would be the name. The second, the supplier identification, which talks about how to contact the manufacturer. The precautionary statements, that's where first aid is listed, and it talks about what you may need to use the chemical, gloves, washing hands. Then there's the hazard pictogram, and I have more about that on the next slide. Then there's a single word used to indicate the relative level of severity of the hazard and alert the reader to a potential hazard on the label. The single word used are danger and warning. Danger is for the more severe hazards, while warning is used for less severe hazards. A hazard statement is assigned to a hazard class and category that describes the nature of the hazard of a chemical, including where appropriate the degree of the hazard. Supplemental information, anything else about the chemical that they want you to know that doesn't fit in any of the other 6 classes. This is the pictograms, and I have this in all our AWARE books at the table of contents for our SDS sheets. And then this is a sample of the new label they'll be using. The old chemical sheet to find out information was called the material safety data sheet. Now it's called the safety data sheet. It'll still be in the AWARE book in the same place, the same that the material safety data sheets were, but it's just called safety data sheets. And our book should be full with the safety data sheets by December 2015. So how do you know what a chemical is if the bottle's label is defective? Well, you need to tell your supervisor. You need to replace the label when you find out what it is. If you don't know, smell it lightly, note the color and the consistency, and see if you can figure it out. Where do you find out what first aid is needed? The bottle of a label, the SDS, the employee training and information that we have given you. So what does SDS stand for? Safety Data Sheet. As I said earlier, it was a material safety data sheet. All employees have information about the chemicals they work with. So on the safety data sheet, which is in the AWAIR book, Section 1, identification, it tells you what the product is, who the manufacturer is, and how to get a hold of them and how you should use the product. 2 talks about the hazards of the product. 3 talks about the composition of the product. 4 is the first aid measures you would need if you had a problem with the product. Firefighting would be 5. 6, any kind of accidental release of the product. 7, how do you handle and store it. 8, if there's exposure to it, and what kind of personal protection you would need working with the product. 9 would be physical and chemical properties of the product. 10 is stability and reactivity. 11, toxicology information. 12, ecology. 13, disposal considerations. 14, transport information. 15, regulatory information. And 16, all the other information that doesn't fit in the other 15 categories. Here's an example of Lysol. These are the first 2, identifying of the substance and composition of the substance. It's not a very good picture, but you get the idea. 3 and 4 being important because it's first aid, whether you're in Japan or the United States. 4 will always have the first aid measures listed on the safety data sheet. We have written hazard sheets and SDSs, again, formerly MDS sheets, in the AWAIR book in your department. Every employee is responsible to be familiar with the plan and ask questions if you are unsure about any of the policies and procedures. Where is the location of the AWAIR book in your department? The AWAIR course I gave earlier, in general, AWAIR course will tell you where the books are, and a number of books are shown in the video following this. Again, I want to mention never mix chemicals. We had someone mix ammonia and chlorine and made mustard gas, and that didn't make them feel too well. They did okay. We gave them some air, but please don't mix chemicals. And here are the 4 locations of the eye wash stations. And it also shows where some of the SDS AWAIR books are, where the SDS information is. If anyone can tell me exactly where the music comes from in this video, I would be impressed. The end.